Hi, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. That's me, Elizabeth Coogan. I'm part of the Customer Experience Group. Last year, I gave it a try and started the session with some random facts. Some of you may remember we talked about mosquitoes and flamingos. And this year, I wanted to talk, I thought I should make a connection more so to higher education. So I did a little investigating, and I found out that Kermit the Frog delivered a commencement speech at Southampton College. And he was awarded a doctorate in amphibious letters, which I think he, in fact, admitted he didn't quite know what that was. But he did, at the time, he thanked the students. The program was about environmental awareness. And so I thought that was kind of a nice lead-in for me to thank you. One, for being here. I might call you the Financial Literacy Impact part of the team, because we're all sort of at this together. I've got some brilliant people on the panel who hopefully are going to share information that's going to be helpful for you to do your job. So about 70% of undergraduate students are receiving some kind of financial aid, so that's a lot of students that are coming through your door. My role at Federal Student Aid, I like to say, is to keep the spotlight on financial literacy. We've got some pretty exciting things that are happening. Hopefully next year, there'll actually be some substantive results. We're taking a close look at the financial aid award letters, which is a real pivotal moment when students are making financial decisions as it relates to paying for college. Taking a look at the MPN, some students are like, they kind of, MPN, the Master Promissory Note, and loan counseling, and you'll hear some more tomorrow from Wayne Johnson about Next Gen, but we're really hopeful that the emphasis will be on financial literacy and financial decision-making in the Next Gen world. So my presenters here all sort of have a little bit of a different slant on what they're going to share with you, but Gretchen's up at the top there. I was lucky enough to work with Gretchen. She was a virtual intern with Federal Student Aid, and she's worked at a money management center, and she's doing some great research on the student debt letter. Kevin Fosnat is from Indiana University. He worked in admissions at University of Michigan and worked closely with financial aid, and he's got a lot of great stuff to share. And Zach Taylor has a very interesting, he's a doctorate student and he's studying linguistics and higher education. So sort of just a simple message is it's important to communicate things, but it's not just what we communicate, but how we communicate. So he's got a lot of great stuff to share. So I promised them I'd be pretty quick in my portion since they have so much great information to share with you. So I'll do some quick updates from Federal Student Aid. Kevin's going to talk about student engagement and financial stress. As I mentioned, Gretchen's going to cover debt letters, and then we're going to talk about communication for financial aid, readability, web accessibility, and some translation. There's some really great and some free tools that Zach's going to share with you. So as a follow-up, I mentioned this last year that there was a survey, so I'd like to sort of get kudos for said we were doing it and we did it. Some numbers came up from the NPSAS survey, the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Survey, which surveys how students are paying for college. So they've added some financial literacy questions to that survey. So that's really hopeful because I think we all realize that we need some more data around this space in terms of making decisions and what's working and what students know and what they don't know. And unfortunately, only 28% of students that were part of the survey answered all three questions correctly, as compared to about 53% of a national survey that was conducted. People got all three answers correct. I always like to bring up the financial literacy guidance. You can get that on the financial aid toolkit. And that's an 8-page document that talks about 3 key concepts that FSA thinks students who are receiving financial aid should understand. And that's budgeting, borrowing, and repayment. So there's not really just one definition for each of those. Each one of those concepts have a lot of terms and things associated with them. But that document summarizes those 3 concepts and the resources that we have that help to demonstrate the various repayment plans and so forth. So we found financial aid offices are using that and find it useful, but more so, it's a great tool for collaboration because we realize that there are more than just financial aid offices that are doing work with students as it relates to their financial lives. So this is a great summary document for you to collaborate with maybe an Office of Student Services who might be working with students as it relates to their overall money management. So my favorite concept within budgeting, borrowing, and repayment, not that, of course, I think repayment is tremendously important, but budgeting is a financial concept that sort of opens so many doors to financial decision-making for students. So this is one of my favorite 2-minute video. Actually, Ron Lieber from the New York Times quoted that you couldn't have done a better job in 2 minutes about demonstrating the value of a budget, specifically for students who are in post-secondary. So it's a 2-minute video, and it's on the Financial Aid Toolkit, and there are other similar videos that talk about student loan repayment and so forth. So we talk about those concepts being important. We have various ways in which they can be communicated. Videos is one, infographics is another. The Financial Awareness Counseling Tool. How many of you know of this and are using it? Ooh, would be a much better, or maybe you're all being shy. But so FACT is loan counseling in between entrance and exit, or as I say, it can be done at any time. We find a lot of third-party organizations who are helping individuals with their debt have come to learn about this tool and are having their clients sign into it. It gives you a picture of your federal loans. It downloads when you sign in with your identifying information, and it also, again, promotes the value of a budget. And one other thing I wanted to mention about FACT is we are conducting a loan counseling experiment. There are about 60 schools who are involved in that, and what we're doing is we are asking schools to require their students to have additional counseling before receiving future disbursements after their initial disbursement. So FACT is one option that schools can use to make students undergo that counseling online before they receive additional disbursements. Lots of schools have thought that that's a great thing, and others think it's administratively burdensome, so we're trying this experiment, and the results will be over the next couple of years. So you probably were handed a piece of paper when you came in. So in addition to FSA being part of the financial literacy impact team and you and schools helping us out, actually we're getting some help from Congress. The president signed the Economic Growth, Regulatory Relief, and Consumer Protection Act back in May. And so this statute asks for the Financial Literacy and Education Commission, and representatives from the commission are here, to help institutes of higher education regarding methods to teach financial literacy and to provide necessary information to assist students when making financial decisions. So the organization that's the FLEC is represented here. They want to hear from people. They want to hear what you want, what you need, what you might be doing, and what's working. So they have prescribed some of the best practice information that should be included, which is listed here. But so we're really looking for some tangible best practices that are actually being used in school. So hopefully some of you are here already doing some great stuff and want to do more. So whether you want to do more, you're doing nothing, you just want to be doing a little, it's great that you're here. And hopefully the panelists will share some good information that will help for you to start your work or to do better. So I encourage you to, someone will be back at the door to pick up if you want to fill out the sheet now. Otherwise, there is a representation in the resource room, and you can go and chat with those folks or drop off the sheet that you got. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you hear me in the back? All right, good. As Elizabeth said, I got my start in higher education in admissions, and we were really lucky to have a great collaboration with our financial aid team, so I have a great appreciation for all the work that you do. Since I've gone to on to become a faculty researcher at Indiana University, where kind of my research focuses on student engagement. So I work on a project called the National Survey of Student Engagement. It's the largest survey of college students in the country and has been, we've been operating, we're just about to hit our 20th anniversary. And what it really does is it measures engagement in effective educational practices, which is really a process indicator of learning. So we're really measuring whether or not the students at your campuses are learning and how they do that. You know, from my perspective, you know, financial aid is critical to student engagement. If you can't afford to buy a textbook, you can't prepare for class, by reading the day's readings prior to the lecture. Alternately, if you can't afford to participate in a HIP like a learning community, study abroad, HIP is a high impact practice in our lingo. If you can't afford to do that, you're going to have fewer chances to engage, and also you're going to have probably less learning, according to the research on average. So kind of my plug, I'm going to have a quick little plug here. So if I want you to encourage you to use our data, you probably have it. If you're at a 2-year campus, you can go to our sister survey, the Community College Survey of Student Engagement based at the University of Texas at Austin. Alternately, if you're a 4-year school, you probably have NESI data. And I would really encourage you to look and see one way to actually measure the effectiveness of your financial aid programming is to look at whether or not students are engaged. You guys probably already have this data on your campus. It's probably in the institutional research office, so go ask them for it. So just some quick information on finances and student engagement. Students learn and develop over time through educationally effective practices, both inside and outside of the classroom. That's why facilitating those, especially those out of classroom activities through financial aid is critical. And also how an institution structures its curriculum and resources is really critical to student engagement and therefore student learning. According to some researchers at Ohio State, the kind of key indicator of being financially stressed is not having enough money to participate in the same activities as your peers. So basically, financially stressed students actually are saying that they want to be more engaged and therefore want to learn more. My research also comes to the same conclusion. So I think it's critical for institutions to reduce financial stress and therefore to improve student learning. So in 2017 at NESI, we added some questions to our survey that focused on financial stress, financial knowledge, and financial education resources on their campuses. Kind of 3 kind of critical aspects of this kind of financial stress, education, literacy, that's so important to student engagement. We asked questions of about 13,000 students. They all attended 34 institutions across the country, and they varied in their characteristics. So here are a couple results. First, so this is kind of some of the financial stress questions. We have about half of students say they frequently worried about paying for college. This isn't just rarely, this is often or very often. Also, the same is about having enough money worrying about having enough money to pay for their regular expenses. About a little over a quarter to a third of students generally said that they actually did not even purchase required academic materials due to their cost. Therefore, they're not buying textbooks that are required for their classes. And also, just slightly less than half of students said they frequently chose not to participate in an activity due to a lack of money. And that's kind of, per the Ohio State researchers, that's kind of that key indicator of financial stress. So when we look at this overall, what are the trends in financial stress? This is just the question about worrying about paying for college. Luckily, the results are a little bit proved over time. From when I started doing this research in 2012, half of seniors and almost 60% of first-year students worried about paying for college frequently. That continued to 2015. However, in the past few years, we've seen it decline by 5 to 10 percentage points. I'm guessing this is due to the economy or some other changes in student aid and either at the institution or state level or also at the federal level. It's hard to determine the cause, but so there is a little improvement on this metric, luckily. So one key way to help students is to provide emergency or short-term financial loans. Basically, these are, students come to college frequently with little savings. If so, they're expected to use that savings to pay for college. And actually, our financial aid kind of equations actually kind of penalize students for having savings. So, if you get in a car accident, you break your leg because you fell down the stairs or anything like that, having the money to pay for that unexpected expense is kind of critical, and if not, it can actually be a barrier and a reason for students to drop out of college. So this is one way for institutions to really help students overcome those unexpected expenses. Yet most students actually say that they don't even know if their school has a short-term kind of financial assistance or loan program. So this is one area that can definitely be improved, just letting students know whether or not they exist. Next, we asked some questions about financial knowledge and basically literacy. Just one quick question we asked: what is the standard repayment term for a federal loan? Less than half of students answered this correctly. We have similar results for whether or not they knew what a subsidized loan was. About 40% of first-year students knew what a subsidized loan was. Only 56% of seniors did. Then we also asked about some financial education resources that they utilized. As you can kind of see, frequently either they say they did not participate in these activities or don't remember participating. Most students say they actually never participated in a financial education kind of seminar, course, counseling, etc. So there's students either don't know about these, they're not participating, or don't remember, unfortunately. The most frequently used one was student loan counseling, and the good news for that is in kind of our research on predicting kind of financial literacy, student loan counseling was actually the most effective out of all these, so that is a good sign. And before I turn it over to Gretchen, another way institutions can kind of help improve students' financial literacy is letting them know how much student loan debt they have. Per our data, just about half of first-year students say that their institution told them how much debt they are going to accrue, and about 60% of seniors. So with that, I will turn it over to Gretchen. Thank you.
All righty. As Kevin mentioned, we both are from Indiana University, and we work at the Center for Post-Secondary Research. So I work right down the hall from Kevin, so that's been great getting to collaborate with him on all of that wonderful data that he has. My background was actually in psychology prior to entering into the field of education. And so I sometimes bring a different lens or perspective to the work that we do. I work with a lot of economists now, and so that's kind of a fun collaboration. What I would recommend is thinking across your campus, who can you collaborate with? Really some of these creative ideas that we've seen financial aid offices or campuses coming up with to help solve the financial literacy crisis have been efforts that have gone beyond one office or one unit. My work at Wichita State began with a federal college access challenge grant to create a website called mycollegemoneyplan.org. We set out to help students find the best college they could afford. And we were doing promotion for this nationally as well as locally. And what we started realizing is that as students were learning about this resource, they also had questions they wanted to ask in person. So even though we didn't really have a counseling center set up, folks started dropping by asking for tips. And that included faculty and staff as well. So we looked to our neighbors, University of Kansas, Kansas State University. We went down to Texas and learned from them, and they had all created these student money management centers. They were centers that were run by students providing peer-to-peer financial counseling. And we saw some great things happening there. So we opened up our own center, and in the first year, we worked with over 8,000 students providing financial education. We also saved our students over $40,000 in tax preparation filing fees because we worked with the IRS and United Way to help get trained on how to provide free tax preparation for students. So there's some real cost-saving solutions here for students, and you can understand too how working with peers may be a more effective way at times to provide financial education. Peers tend to model other peers' behavior, and so getting advice from another peer is an excellent way to get that education. I then went to IU. I thought, this is really cool. I think more campuses should be doing this, but we didn't have the research supporting it yet. So I went to IU. They had done some awesome work, which we'll talk about here on the next slide. And now I get to teach an undergraduate course on financial planning for college. It fills up well in advance every single semester. And so if you're thinking, maybe we should offer a course on this, I'll tell you the interest is there, and most of my students say, I wish every student here had to take this class. It's great. So just things to think about as you're looking at possible solutions to the financial literacy problem. I worked with Elizabeth as a financial literacy intern with Federal Student Aid in 2017. That was an amazing experience. If you're a student and interested in working with her, definitely talk to her about that opportunity. And then that opportunity led to an appointment with the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center, which is housed in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Anna Maria Lusardi is an economist, and she's interested in financial literacy, believe it or not, because it can impact countries' financial stability. So if a lot of people don't know a lot about finances, that can have a huge impact on your state, your community, the country. So definitely look at their resources if you're thinking about things you want to link to on your website. They have some great materials there. So I mentioned I came to IU because they were doing something really neat. They started doing these student loan debt letters. Student loan debt letters are really just an email or a letter that's mailed out and tells students, they tell students how much debt they've borrowed and what their monthly repayment would be if they were to stop where they're at now. Many states thought this was a great idea after seeing IU's success, and so now we've seen legislation come out. Nebraska, Indiana, Florida, Washington, Iowa, and Oregon have proposed or passed laws requiring these debt letters to be sent to students at colleges and universities. There's actually been a new bill proposed to make this a national requirement, and so you can look that up online if you're interested in reading more about that. So IU, what got everyone's attention about this debt letter stuff? Within 2 years, they had reduced their student loan borrowing by $44 million. By 2016, so within 4 years, they had reduced it by $100 million. News articles picked up on the fact that they had sent out these debt letters, and they said, could this be the solution? Well, being at IU, studying, working with them now, I see that it's much more complex at times than providing the debt letter. It's a great starting point, but I think what the research will show you is that students actually want a little bit more. They need the letters, but maybe a little bit more as well. IU created a multifaceted financial literacy program. Being on campus, I can tell you our buses that transport students from point A to B are wrapped in information about financial literacy. Our president, in each of his addresses, has spoken about financial literacy. So there's a lot of buy-in at IU. Beyond debt letters, they also offer peer-to-peer financial counseling. They have a podcast they've done on personal finance. They have loan calculators, online coursework that students can go through for free. And they changed to banded tuition, so they charge the same for 15 credit hours as they do for 12, trying to encourage students to graduate on time. So we see all of this was happening simultaneously, and it can be difficult to discern what was the outcome of the debt letter itself versus some of these other more holistic programs that were going on campus. Luckily, researchers at Montana State had the same question. So Carly Urban and her team researched debt letters that were sent to Montana State, and then they did a comparison at the University of Montana where no debt letters were sent. And they said, let's see what happens. Do we have this massive decline in student loan debt? And what they found was when they sent their letters, they actually targeted them for students who they thought were at a high level of debt. And what they found was there wasn't much change in borrowing behavior, but there were some unintended consequences or outcomes that they hadn't really thought about. They had mentioned in their satisfactory academic progress, and they had outlined briefly in plain language what that meant. And what they found was that students increased their GPAs when they received the debt letter with this information. They were also more likely to be retained that semester and that year. again, another university got interested in this topic, and in 2017, the University of Missouri also looked at debt letters. Their letters were different because they said, let's try to see, is there any harm, right, that could come from discouraging people from taking on loans? We're interested in knowing if a student needs a loan and we say, try to reduce your debt, are they going to drop out? What's going to happen? Could this be a bad program, right? We don't know. And so they sent out a very factual letter, and it just told them what their borrowing was. They didn't encourage or discourage any behavior, and didn't really recommend many other resources. It was a very basic letter. What they found was that students were slightly more likely to go and talk to a financial aid officer after receiving this factual information. They also found some negative information that helps us in our work. They realized that less than half of the students remembered receiving this letter. It started to blend in with other things they'd received from financial aid, other offices on campus. So students who received these letters gave them some tips. And they said, this information's great, but once we have it, what do we do next, right? And so I want to encourage us to think beyond debt letters. Debt letters are wonderful, but let's also think about how we support students then after the debt letters are sent. Maybe this is peer-to-peer financial counseling. Maybe it's a financial course they could take. Maybe it's just additional resources that they have links to. The good news that they found was that there wasn't any negative outcomes associated with receiving the debt letter. Students were no more likely to withdraw from courses, to leave the institution, to change their major, or to increase the number of hours they worked. So we didn't see any harm come from sending debt letters, which is really great. So to summarize, debt letters have demonstrated some potential financial improvements for students and academic improvements. We still have a lot of work to do in this field. We're just getting started, but I think it's something that is worth trying and experimenting with on your own campus. Some of the next kind of best practices that we're going to recommend is having something that captures students' attention. We want them to be able to have information that they can act upon after they receive it. And we also want to talk to them about a timely graduation, because it seems that that's really important in some of the outcomes we've seen. And then again, I want you to think about holistically, what can you be doing on your campus to support these initiatives beyond debt letters? With that, I'll turn it over to Zach Taylor. You are in for a treat because he researches linguistics and financial aid, which I think is fascinating. It's one of those examples of the really creative projects that people are doing, and so you're in for a treat to hear him.
Hey, good afternoon, y'all. My name is Zach from UT Austin. I'm going to lead with a quick story. My contact info is up there if you're interested. All my papers are linked to my Google Scholar. I was working with a high school student in Green Bay, Wisconsin, about 10 years ago now. He had been an early admit to the University of Michigan. He had a 34 on his ACT. Very sharp kid. And he wanted to go into law. He wanted to become a lawyer. And I said, well, then Michigan undergrad, Yale Law. And he looked at me really confused. And I said, Yale University, like the law school. And he said, no, what's an undergrad? Didn't know what an undergraduate was. 34 in the ACT. This is kind of a microcosm of what I'll be talking about today. It turns out his dad completed his application for him. And the only thing that he wrote, he didn't even write his own resume, he wrote the essay, the admissions essay. It's the only thing he did in that application process. So understanding that really high-achieving students might not know all the words that we use in our kind of everyday vernacular. So, research so far, that is a screenshot from Clark University. Anybody from Clark in this room? Maybe not? Okay. Well, if you are interested, you can do a Google Advanced search on your phone and look up university financial aid jargon. And you'll find almost 100 college websites in the U.S. now publish a financial aid glossary or dictionary on their website, effectively sending the message, before y'all fill this out, read this dictionary first. It's that complicated, right? So I looked at 300 randomly selected four-year institutions. I just looked at the integrated post-secondary education database. I pulled out a random sample with statistical significance of Title IV participating schools. I found that the average financial aid application instruction, so how to complete the FAFSA, about the 14th grade English reading comprehension level. Very, very difficult to read. All institutions, so all 300, only provided English. So now this is usually the part of the presentation where someone gets on their phone, looks at their website and says, do we translate? Do we have anything else in a language other than English? And a lot of schools don't. Washington State University has an excellent bilingual financial aid website if you're curious. But in this sample, no one provided any Spanish language content or any translated content whatsoever. It was English only. The average length, about 1,000 words. So I'm a doctoral student, I think, in Microsoft Word pages. It's about 4 double-spaced Microsoft Word pages about how to complete the FAFSA. Several did not contain contact information, so there was no information in the footer information in the website about how to contact anyone for financial aid. There was no phone number, there was no email address. This is a forthcoming study in the Journal of Student Financial Aid, hopefully in the spring, and there'll be a lot more detail in that study to come. Other research I've been doing has been focusing on the jargon of financial aid application instructions. So I recently surveyed a nationally representative sample. We had a prospective college student from every single state in the country respond to this survey. 40% were traditional college-age students, aged 18 to 24, where 60% of them were non-traditional and were adult learners. Respondents were asked, and I picked a random sample from my previous study of 3 financial aid application instructions from the institutional website. And I asked the respondents, read these 3 sets of instructions and pick out words that you don't know. Very simple study. 50% of them identified at least 2 jargon terms that they did not understand. A lot of people identified 5 or more. Different terms, not the same ones from instruction to instruction, 5 different terms in those 3 sets. The common terms included FAFSA. A lot of times on the website, FAFSA was not defined. The acronym was used, but the explanation, the definition of the acronym was not used. MPN also, as Elizabeth mentioned, Master Promissory Note, that was all over the websites. Very few websites actually defined that term. Also, entrance counseling and FSA ID. I controlled for age, income, gender, race, language, first-gen status. There was no statistical significance of any personally identifying demographic material and the number of jargon terms identified, meaning it's hard for everybody. Everyone struggled with it. That is a breakdown of the unigrams, bigrams, and trigrams. So I'm talking linguistics now, but those are just single-word jargon terms, 2-word jargon terms, and 3-word jargon terms for everyone here. Again, across all 3 texts, the jargon was really different from text to text. A lot of acronyms up there, and then a few institutions used tax forms like the 4506T and the 1099, and a lot of students did not know what those forms meant. So if you're curious, this presentation will be on the website. You'll be able to look at that in more detail. So objectives, quickly then. Explaining readability, translation, and accessibility hurdles in financial aid communication, providing some best practices for writing, kind of going back to 7th grade grammar school. We're going to learn about writing an active voice. Providing real-world examples. Although I'm a Longhorn, I always use a great example from Texas A&M. We have a hardcore rivalry, but they have an excellent financial aid website, and I'll actually show you that in a minute. I will share those freely available technologies. It's actually at the end of this presentation. There's a list of links for you to follow. I also have made tutorial videos of all the software that I share, so I can share those links with you, and you can learn how to use them. And then I usually demonstrate how to use the technology in real time. So readability in higher education, when I talk about readability, it's a grade level readability measure. So essentially, counting how many complex words, so 3 or more syllables per sentence, and then how many words per sentence, or how many sentences per paragraph, or how many stop punctuation, or commas, or semicolons. There are many different measures, and a lot of them have been used for 60 or 70 years by our Department of Defense. So in the 1960s, during the Vietnam War conflict, we needed soldiers who knew how to assemble a helicopter. So those instructions had to be really simple, because not a lot of men in the military at that time had gone to college and were excellent readers. So our Department of Defense actually started workplace literacy programs in this country because they had to train soldiers about how to assemble stuff. Long story short, I list a bunch of references up there for you for advance. Keeping in mind the average U.S. adult, U.S. resident, reads at about the 7th grade level. That's why magazines like Us Weekly are really popular, because they're written very simply. Only 37% of high school graduates read and comprehend at their grade level, at the 12th grade level. A lot of college students do not read at the 12th grade level, so keeping that in mind. And then a lot of material in higher ed is unreadable. I recently published a study about sexual assault reporting guidelines. Those were on average the 17th grade reading level. ADHD documentation guidelines about the 16th grade reading level. Really dense, really complicated stuff. We're talking 90-word sentences with sometimes 4 or 5 semicolons. That's really dense, even for college-educated folks like us. Piggybacking a little bit on Kevin's idea about readability and stress, when we're stressed out, we tend not to read and comprehend like we normally would. That kind of simplifies the research for you. Individuals respond differently to stress. Obviously, if you practice SATs and you drill yourself to be able to handle that kind of stress, you kind of acclimate to that stress. But we're not filing the FAFSA over and over and over and over again. We're only maybe filing it 4 or 5 times across an undergraduate or graduate career. So the origin and duration of stress obviously it influences cognitive function. Again, the more stressed out we are, the worse we are as readers. Sometimes acute stress in a well-rehearsed task. I used to be on FAFSA completion night teams, and we'd have students race to see how quickly they could find the FAFSA website. That kind of stuff was helpful, but when it comes to money, I think all of y'all can agree it can get kind of stressful. So just be aware of that. Web accessibility, most recently, January 2018 of this year, Section 508 was re-amended for the 4th time to hold all Title IV receiving institutions responsible for making all their content web accessible. If any of y'all follow Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle of Higher Education, they're publishing stories almost all the time about institutions facing lawsuits for not providing accessible content. Down in Texas, we've had EIR laws, which are electronic information resource laws, for about 15 years now, since 2005. That mandated that all content available for students without disabilities must be made available in digital forms with students with disabilities. So we've had that on the books for quite a long time. Websites must be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Long story short is there are so many different disabilities that students come to our institutions having, and there are hundreds of assistive technologies that they use to interact with our content. Your website needs to be detailed enough. Pictures need to have captions, videos need to be closed captioned, hyperlinks needs to have descriptions, so that a wide range of technologies can interact with that text. Long story short, that's what those standards mean. So in a recent study, I looked at Texas institutions on January 19th, right after the deadline, and I found that none of them were web accessible. I actually couldn't apply to a single institution in Texas. I blindfolded myself. I used Mac OS X's VoiceOver software. It's a free accessibility software. And I thought to myself, if I was blind, could I apply to a single school in Texas? And I could not. All 259 2- and 4-year schools were not accessible. I could not apply for admission to any one of them. Only one school, Brazosport, published a website with 2 errors, but one error was underneath the undergraduate student tab, which was not a good error to have. 11th grade readability, and it had an embedded translator. It was the only institution in Texas to translate its website into Spanish. That was curious to me. So best practices, using short sentences and bullet pointing when possible, and also using active voice to reduce wordiness. Generally, when I talk to a bunch of practitioners, it's a much smaller group, and I ask, how many of y'all know what active voice is? I've never had anyone give me the right answer. It's when the subject performs the verb in a sentence. The kind of morbid example I use is, Zach was hit by the bus. That happened to me. That's in passive voice. Instead, the bus hit Zach. Active voice. The bus is doing the hitting. Notice how many fewer words I'm using in that sentence. If you stretch that across your financial aid application instruction, you'll cut out 50 or 100 words. Just like that. It'll be an active voice. And especially for English language learners who are taught to pick out subjects and verbs in sentence, your sentences become a lot simpler. Use second-person pronouns. A lot of times I never see the word you in instructions. And if we're talking to students, and as Gretchen said, we want our information to be actionable, say you should. Address them by second-person pronouns. Move contact info to the top of the page. A lot of y'all, I'm sure, feel burdened by how much communication you get from other students or parents about how do I do this kind of stuff. Move the contact info to the top of the page. It tends to help. Avoiding jargon and acronyms, so assume that those students have not heard of the MPN or the FSA ID or holistic admissions or the 4506T form. Practice lexical overlap. So if the FAFSA uses verbs like submit and complete, your website should use those verbs too. Students can build prior knowledge of the financial aid process from your website, and when they see the federal website, that language is more familiar and they'll be able to more easily complete the application. Embed video and images to explain difficult concepts, but remember, though, to make that content accessible for students with disabilities. But prioritize text, because web translators are really good. Google Translate right now from English to Spanish is about 90% accurate with proper accenting. It's getting better and better by the second. Google has people working on it as I'm talking right now, making it better. It can read text. It has a harder time reading infographics and video, so maybe prioritize text. Ask a current student to audit your writing. The University of North Texas published a student money management website written entirely by students. Review your website information. Is it readable and is it available in languages other than English, especially? Review the WCAG standards. I have those linked. Is your website compliant? And I have tutorial videos about how you can audit your own website for free. Here is Texas A&M's before and after. So that was the before. I had said, that's an awful lot of links. And then they cut them down. And now they're experiencing fewer phone calls and fewer emails because students can better find the stuff on the website, long story short. So cutting down the number of links, and those big buttons are really easy to pick out. FAFSA, we have the TASFA in Texas, which is the state FAFSA, but anyway. Verification, what a dirty word that is, right? Verification. Polysyllabic, can't stand it. Well, A&M had a paragraph about verification at the 16th grade reading level, just big block of text. They edited it down to some bullet points, 11th grade level. And I asked the financial aid folks, did you have to cut any content? And they said, no. We just reworded it. We didn't lose any information there. FAFSA information from the 13th to 9th grade level. Again, it's a lot of active voice, breaking down bullet points, defining acronyms, that sort of thing. And again, this PowerPoint will be available online. Speaking of debt letters, look at the difference between those two letters, letter A and letter B. One is one page, friendly infographic there in the middle. There's a really simply, easily understood table in the middle, and then letter B is a lot of text. Well, I did a linguistic analysis of those letters. Letter A had a table and a picture about the 12th grade level, fit on one page. Average sentence length, 17 words. Letter B, no visual elements, about the 14th grade reading level, 550 words in length, average sentence length with 20 words. Letter A was written by a student. Letter B was written by a practitioner. So it's interesting to see how students will write the content and how professionals will write the content. And those two letters share a lot of the same information. So letter A is actually being used by a very large urban institution in Texas right now. They have okayed the student version, so it's good enough for them. Anyway, I will pass it on to Elizabeth, who will summarize.
Okay, so we're going to have plenty of time for question as well. And just so sort of some quick thoughts for the fact that data matters, okay? And I heard Kevin talk about the Institutional Research Office, and so an opportunity for collaboration. I know of one school that really sat down for about a half a day and talked to their Institutional Research Office about sort of quote-unquote problem students, that they find students who do such and such or whatever. And so they provided a whole scenario of student segmentation, and they communicated financial aid information based on the demographics and the characteristics of students, and they had some really great results. It's obvious that our students are experiencing financial stress. Kevin showed about the usage of financial aid programs. So we may find students say, yeah, we've got such and such, but are students showing up? I think that's a challenge that everybody faces. Maybe somebody has some great examples of how students are encouraged and they do in fact show up. And then when they do show up, what are we providing them and what are we telling them, and is it effective? Gretchen really clearly pointed out about debt letters. They may improve outcomes. They certainly, it sounds like they do get, I'm sure everyone doesn't really want to increase the line outside the financial aid office, but it does cause students to pay attention, to ask questions, and to come to the financial aid office. And ultimately, we want to do whatever we can to help answer their questions. And I think that Zach provided some fabulous information, again, on it's not exactly, and I think at federal student aid, we're guilty as well, as yes, well, we've told them it's in the instructions, but what do the instructions look like, and are we communicating clearly into the level of that students require? So hopefully you're feeling encouraged and not discouraged about the hurdles that you may have ahead of you. The statute that I pointed out, hopefully that will perhaps provide some encouragement to your administration to indicate that the importance of this, and it's actually something that's been mandated by Congress. There'll be more resources for telling you what to do, okay, but so it's how do we do it? And so more than likely you're going to need resources to help you with that, so that might help you with making the case. Mentioned the collaboration, and it's not just institutional research. And there are schools that actually have called financial literacy or financial wellness sort of advisory boards, that it's more than just the financial aid. So that's nice for you all to hear that it shouldn't just be about financial aid, but we do know that many students, when financing their education, are coming to the doors of financial aid for help in managing their financial aid and their financial lives. Ways in which we can impact more students. Think about the debt letter. There's lots of examples that are already out there, but as Zach pointed out, perhaps you want to think about having some students participate in authoring that letter if you're working on it. And looking at your communications, again, people may be saying, oh, great, that's just something else on our plate, but it is really important. So we'd like to take this time to see what questions you have. We have the mic up here, actually. And Zach's the youngest one up here on the panel. Maybe I'll have you run out with the mic. So if anyone would like to ask a question, or we have somebody that's close by here that wants this maybe. So, oh, you will. Okay. Thanks, Louisa.
This is very large.
We started issuing the debt letter for the first time this year. We included both dispersed loans and loans that were offered, but the student had not yet accepted in that amount that they would have for repayment. That helps students who can understand the full amount of their borrowing if they accept that offered loan. But we also had some students that were confused and even angry, saying, I don't have any loans. Why are you telling me I'm going to have a repayment? So have you thought about that and what to include in that debt letter?
Yeah, I think that's a valid question and is one that I don't think has been explored much yet, to be quite honest. We've seen a lot of variation in how these debt letters are structured, and so it may take some experimenting, and if you yourself are seeing or hearing feedback at your institution one way or the other, you may consider what that means. I would be excited to see other institutions publish some of their research findings on what the outcomes are. So it's a great idea for a study if someone's interested at your university in helping you assess the differences potentially in one version or another.
Can I piggyback on that quickly? So, and this isn't higher ed research, this is more journalism, but you'll find that a lot of times newspapers only will publish 1 or 2 statistics per feature story because you don't want to overburden your reader with statistics and numbers because it's difficult to understand those and how those are measured. So I think maybe ask your students, how many numbers, how many dollar amounts do you want to see in a letter? Like, what can you actually remember? What do students actually need to see? And what's, helping them make the best choice possible. And again, that research hasn't been done, but to Gretchen's point, it's a great research project. And how many dollar amounts should be on the debt letter? It's a good question.
Hi, my name is Max. I'm from Syracuse University. Thank you all for convening this panel, because this panel is basically my job. So thank you. I got a bunch of questions, and I'll link up with everybody afterwards. But so on our campus, we've been charged with trying to provide financial literacy for the entire campus. However, we have only a fraction of our entire undergraduate student body who actually borrow. So we're about 3 or 4 years into the whole debt letter project, and we went with physical mail instead of email for the higher open rate. Just hoping that the communication actually lands in front of a face at a higher percentage than if it were like just an email. And so I'm wondering if, through your research combined as a panel, if you have found any tools or resources that are kind of a best practice for individuals or families or students who aren't borrowers, and what those tools would be.
No, you got us. Yeah, maybe you can come up after and maybe we can discuss it in a little more detail. But as you were speaking, I was going to make sure, I know you have an Orange Man, I think, sponsor or whatever, so and if anyone wants to, you use Kermit the Frog as their sponsor for their programs, but I think Syracuse has an Orange Man that provides fairly good lessons. Otto, aren't you worried you don't know all of that? Yeah. Okay. Hopefully the next question will be easier for the panel here now. Anybody else?
Yeah, just a question on the debt letter. Is the servicer ever mentioned? Because I know with student loan debt, it's important for them to know who to contact to discuss repayment options and issues. I didn't hear anything about referring them to that entity that they need to know.
In the samples that I've looked at, I have not seen that information provided. Again, I would love to see research on that and see if it would be beneficial.
Yeah, also, we'd like to see the debt letter reference FACT, the Financial Awareness Counseling Tool, and to send students there as a possibility. We also at the department acknowledge that we really need to communicate students' outstanding loan balance and the payment more frequently every time a student really sort of enters or whatever, and those are some of the things that we've been talking about, especially in the next-gen environment.
And I have just one suggestion about whether or not to do an electronic or paper letter. So with an electronic letter, you can actually embed a unique URL into that letter. So if there is contact information or a website in an email, you can start to track the click rate a little bit, and you can see, well, not only are students opening the email, if you're using like a SurveyMonkey or whatever, you can see if the students are opening the email and they're interacting with it. Whereas the physical letter, you will never know unless they contact you. So I think there is some technological advantage to sending an electronic letter, maybe in addition to the paper, so then you can at least track how many clicks you're getting and what kind of interaction students are having with the letter. Just an idea.
Actually, I'd like to piggyback off that. I'm a survey researcher. Students aren't looking at their emails anymore, or a lot less frequently than they were. We've had a lot of success embedding links and information into kind of course management software, so that students go there every day for their courses to answer or complete assignments, do readings. So that's another way to actually make sure that students see this information.
Any more question? The mic's over here. Thanks, Louisa.
Hi, I'm Lorlag with the community college, and one of the things that I'm challenged with is I come from a low-income area where I have a lot of welfare, a lot of our Chafee students, because we do have a dorms, which is, we're one of the few colleges, or community colleges in California that has a dorm. I don't do a debt letter, but when I do a award letter out for the students that have applied for a loan, I put a card in with it that we've made up that has what their prior loan debt is, what their current loan debt is, what their estimated payment's going to be. With down at the bottom, I have it where they can contact NSLDS for more information. And on the back of the card, if I know who their loan servicer is, I mark it. And we're kind of going more paperless too. So on our website too, I also put this information in their portal as well. So they kind of get it double. But one of the things I'm really challenged with is, like I said, I come from a low income area. And so a lot of our students want to do student loans. And I'm try to get them not to do so many student loans, because at a community college in California, we have a lot of resources at our level that realistically they shouldn't need to have student loans, but our loan debt is high at our college. So that's one of the things I'm challenged with, is ideas on how to encourage students not to go the loan way, because for them, a lot of students, it looks like real easy money because they don't have it.
So first and foremost, I didn't talk about scholarship application instructions, but if you think the financial aid application instructions are difficult to read, holy cow. Because a lot of times, whoever's endowing that scholarship has very unique language that they want to describe the scholarship with, and it's very fancy and it sounds very prestigious, and it's so unreadable. It is ridiculous. I was looking at scholarships the other day, comparing them at UT Austin and at Texas A&M, talking 1,000 words about how to complete the application, and there are so many qualifications a student has to have, and then of course those instructions are at the 19th grade level. It's just really, really difficult. And I think if you're talking about a California community college context, first and foremost, make sure your website is bilingual, so have some Spanish content on there, and then make sure, if you are feeling the need to kind of push your students or nudge them toward scholarships, make sure that that information is really easily readable and that they can actually complete the application online. So I've found a lot of times student scholarship applications, at least in my Texas context, can't be completed online. You have to download a form, which requires you to have Adobe to open the PDF and then fill out the form, and it's intimidating to me, and I have filled out a lot of PDFs. So I would suggest that making that application completable online, and make sure it's bilingual in Spanish, and make sure it's simple for scholarships anyway.
I would also add, just to be mindful of how much of your aid is in emergency types of loans that students can access with a short turnaround time. One of the things that I see just in advising the students that I work with is that if our scholarship application is April, but they need money in September, like they can't wait for that amount of time. So reviewing and revising potentially some of those dates or how the aid is administered might help.
Hey, my name is Austin Floyd. I'm with the South Carolina Technical College System. We just hired a new default task management vendor, so many times we're trying to catch it on the alternate end. I don't really have a question, just a comment. I'm not really in the technology sector, but I think about using technology and gamification to try to get the message across. Just thinking about Gen Z and how they want stuff quick and visual. It would be cool to have an app or a game that only lasts 5 or 10 minutes. Hey, you're going to be making $30,000 or $40,000 after you pay all your bills. Oh, wait, you have $500 left. Whoop. The student loan people come in and take that because you're paying $200 a month or something. So I'm just wondering if there are some tools or resources that already exist using gamification, using technology, targeting Generation Z, just making it more fun where you're not giving them information, but you're like faking information in there, and it's fun, and they don't even know that they're learning.
Texas reality, I think. Yeah. Go ahead, Zach.
Can I mention that?
You know about? Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
I don't know if I can mention an app by name, but I'm going to. Pluto Money is really, really slick. I don't know how many of y'all have heard of Pluto Money, but I ran into the CEO at a conference sometime and downloaded the app, and it integrates into a student's calendar, it integrates into their alarms, it integrates into their contacts, text messages. They can set themselves reminders. It actually had an alert saying, this pumpkin spice latte costs you $6 now, and if it was a loan, it would cost you $8.10 in 10 years, or whatever. It was really clever. And I thought to myself, if I had that in college, I would not have gone out to McDonald's so often, something like that. So Pluto Money is a really slick app. It's optimized for Android and Apple, so you should be able to download it any kind of mobile phone. But that is one of the apps that is really... It's about a money management lifestyle. That's how they kind of pitch the app, but it's really, really slick. So Pluto Money is a really great one.
I'll add a less techie version of making this fun and exciting. Through our Student Money Management Center, we hosted a Game of Life event, and it's really like a debt letter come to life. So students get a projection from the financial aid table, the booth that they're at, of what their debt would look like. And then they're asked to go to different booths and pay for things like childcare, housing, to get a sense of what the reality is going to be when they graduate. And we had lots of banks and places that wanted to sponsor, and so you can work that out with your university of appropriate guidelines for them to volunteer at that booth and what they might provide, t-shirts or a free lunch for students. But that's a kind of way to get students right on campus. A lot of universities have success with that, with like 500 or more students attending, so they can be really big events.
Hi, Sunny Wallace, Boise State University. I have a question kind of on the other end of the spectrum. We have a lot of students who come in and are very debt averse. They've been told by kind of conservative Idaho families that borrowing money is bad, and so they've internalized that. And so we find that they'll work 2 or 3 jobs and kind of inch along in college, still very stressed out about money, but not kind of calculating that risk-benefit payoff, which is a kind of complicated thing to think about at 18, right? And how much risk are you willing, how much debt are you willing to take on, and what would be the payoff of that? We're just trying to figure out, we do have classes on campus, financial literacy classes, and students do sign up for those, but we find it's maybe not the students that necessarily need them. The students that maybe need them are the ones that are out working the 3 jobs, so don't have time. They don't sign up for that class. So I'm just trying to figure out how to target a population that's really hard to reach. They're super, super busy, and might even have shame or other feelings about money. It just make it hard to talk about.
One thing I will say is that peer mentoring role is beneficial in so many ways. We were wanting to reach out to international students on our campus, and so we hired an international peer financial coach, and they have friends, right, within their own community. And so you start to see, as you hire students across the campus, that they're naturally bringing in their own networks. Their friends are stopping by for lunch, right? They're maybe meeting on a class project right after work. So involving students who are already in those groups that you're wanting to reach can help.
I had one follow-up. So I was one of those debt-averse students. I was very Pell eligible, and I had no idea that I was Pell eligible. I would have gone to college for free, but I paid out of pocket because I was deathly afraid of owing someone money. That terrified me. What I found Milwaukee Area Technical College did, which was really clever, is they went to where they knew students worked and asked restaurants, businesses to put up a flyer how to go to college for free at MATC. Go to apply for your Pell Grant, apply for institutional scholarships. That was really effective. So I think understanding, maybe you do a campus climate survey. I know that UT Austin does this. We get an idea of where students are working, and then there are some kind of targeted marketing efforts at those places of work that you can actually connect with students where they're at. So if they're working those 2nd or 3rd jobs, where are they working? So know your students. And then I would be hard-pressed to find anyone who owns a business within proximity of that institution a one-page flyer saying, can I put this up to support the college students who work for you? I don't know who's going to turn you away. Maybe they do, but at least you tried, So maybe that's just one idea.
One more thing, sorry. I think this is cute. We had hired a marketing intern who was an undergraduate, and she came up with all of these great ideas that we were not coming up with as staff. And one of them was commuter coffee. And so we were having a hard time reaching those students who were working, 60 hours a week or something. So we had coffee right where we knew they got off the bus stop, and we passed out flyers, real quick, one-page, information on what we were trying to promote.
I would also add, that's kind of I think it's really a mindset challenge, and therefore I would encourage you to also incorporate alumni into some of your programming to kind of show and demonstrate the long-term investments of college, so that they understand that it's not just this 5-10 year period, but maybe it's a 40-year investment to help them overcome some of that debt aversion.
Any more questions out there? Yep, we have somebody in here. Thanks, Louisa, over here.
Hi there, my name is Grace Munyakazi-Connor. I come from the College of Healthcare Profession in the Texas area, Houston. I'm from an online division where most of our students, the majority of our students actually are your non-traditional students. So they started school way later on in life. They're definitely not debt adverse. So they're looking for the stipend check to help with living expenses. They're single parents and so on. So our challenge is really trying to do the financial awareness, the entrance counseling, to really ensure that they understand, don't take all this loan out because you'll have to repay and so on. So what else can you recommend and so on for our typical student?
I've run into a lot of folks who assume that college students are tech natives and just assume that they know how to use the website and have applied for something before. I mean, it's pretty incredible how many people in this country just don't have a lot of basic tech skills. So one, I wouldn't assume that they have those tech skills. So maybe before you talk anything finance-wise, it's here's the tech we use, visit our website. If you have a chat application or you have an email, interact with those students so they get them comfortable with interacting with that technology. Because I think too, I mean, my friends who are now working adults who didn't go to college, they're just not technology people. They're tech averse, so they're kind of higher ed averse too, interestingly enough. And then with returning adult students, I have found because the tax information is now embedded into that FAFSA process, a lot of returning adults in my study didn't know any of the jargon surrounding those IRS processes. Some adults didn't know what IRS stood for. So I think too, assuming a lot of knowledge, and I see you're shaking or you're nodding your head like, yeah, this sounds familiar. So I think not assuming a lot of knowledge, don't assume tech native status, and don't assume that they're familiar with a lot of federal processes because they may not have ever gone through that before.
Well, I would also say, basically reach out to the instructors of those courses. Those are going to be the gatekeepers to kind of provide information directly to students. Same thing with if you have kind of digital advising, kind of those platforms or personnel. I think those are the best ways to reach kind of a non-traditional audience, especially online.
Okay, anybody? Okay, we've got two more up here in the back.
Hi, my name is Diana, and I come from the University of Texas at El Paso. So the struggle that we have, just because we're a border city, we have a lot of first generation going to the university. And the problem that we're having is that neither the student or the parent, they have no clue what any of this is. So we're having a really hard time trying to reach out to them, and I think more specifically the parents, because I don't know about your offices, but in our office we have the students coming in to ask questions, and they bring their whole family with them. It's like mom, dad, brother, sister, so it's like a community effort for them, at least at my university. So our struggle is trying to reach not just the student, but also the parent, because they feel like it's a lot. They're very confused, so they feel like it has to be like a team effort. So how would you recommend that we provide that information, or what's the best way to reach out to them as a group?
Yes. First of all, El Paso, awesome, Texas. My friend Lupe works for the Federal Reserve Bank in El Paso, and she is responsible largely for educational initiatives. So find me after this, and I'll connect you with Lupe because she's doing some awesome stuff. And then El Paso and a lot of the colonias in South Texas, they're doing these kind of mobile internet units. So they're actually taking retrofitted school buses and vans and driving down to places with no running water, no electricity, and they're handing out bilingual, Spanish college content. And then there's actually a bus with a Wi-Fi receptor that is allowing them to actually complete processes on a bus or outside of a bus. So Lupe will have a lot more information for you. I don't want to take up any more time, but I'll connect with you afterward.
Okay, maybe we have room for time for one more.
Hi, I'm Rocky from SUNY Binghamton. I just wondered if you had any tips on getting campus buy-in for financial literacy initiatives like debt letters or that peer-to-peer counseling center?
Sure. We tried to quantify things as much as we could. So again, we honestly participated in the IRS program because we thought, hey, we can show some numbers here, right? We essentially paid for our center and the money we saved. So showing any kind of numbers that you can. Qualitative feedback is great as well. We literally just took some bullet points of comments from our student feedback worksheets from our counseling sessions, and they sent them on to our administration. And we also worked with the foundation to then turn that into a promotional item to get support from funders. So just thinking about capturing those data points when you see them.
Also, I would encourage testimonials from students. It's probably the best way to say, oh, this program had this effect on me, and for blah, blah, blah reason. One of the best ways to actually get buy-in.
So thanks everyone for your support and your interest, because we know really financial literacy isn't a must-do, but I think we all know we must try to do more. So I'd like to, since Secretary DeVos had you all clap for yourselves this morning, I don't want you to get a big head, but if you could clap for the panelists that came along so generously and